Hi, Lisa Workman here, clinical exercise physiologist with another installment of Real Moves for Real Life. And I'm all about talking about the hips. This is another video to highlight how amazing that hip joint really is. Now remember, the leg bone and the pelvis connect to actually make our hip joint. And guess what? Oh, I happen to have a pelvis here to show you all about it. So let's recall, here's that leg bone. We've got this really substantial, big round ball on the top of that leg bone. And inside this pelvis, we have a nice little socket that'll hold that ball in and allow that leg to move. And so today's movement is the movement you and I do all the time. Do you know what it is? It is flexion, bringing the leg bone forward, and extension. Now let me give you that profile to see. That leg bone comes forward, and that leg bone comes back behind. This is the action that we do all the time in our day-to-day life. That leg is so used to moving in this way that you don't even realize you're doing it. Every single time you step foot forward, with every walk you go throughout the day, that is the action that is happening. The front leg is in flexion and the back leg is in extension. So go ahead and take a couple walks around your house, maybe go for a walk outside, and you'll realize really quickly how often this leg bone moves in this hip socket in both flexion and extension. And we're so used to it that we actually are, so okay to do that movement that we don't even think about that movement when we incorporate specific exercises. So for today's exercises, they're going to seem fairly straightforward, maybe fairly simple, and maybe ones that you've done many, many times already. However, while I teach you today, I hope that you get something new, something different, something fresh to think about how your hip bone moves in flexion and extension, that leg bone moving in the hip socket. So now it's time to move into the exercises for hip flexion and extension. And so in this position right now, I've got full on flexion here, a little bit of, maybe a little bit of flexion on the bottom leg as well. So let's dive in. We're going to come down onto our backs. So again, backs is great because it helps ground us. It allows our spine and our pelvis to have something to be supported with. So if that's not good for you to come down on the floor, no fear. You can definitely jump onto a couch or onto your bed. Ideally something relatively firm if you have it, but if not, just finding a space where you are the most comfortable lying on your back. We'll bend our knees and keep our feet flat on the floor and just settle in for a moment. You might need to wiggle it out a little bit to find that place of a little bit of comfort. I know it takes me a moment to find that place. And so when we're thinking of where we want to start our legs, just think about those leg bones coming right out of those hip sockets. So the legs aren't super wide, nor are they close together. So about comfortably hip width apart as best you can. You can even glance and take a look to see you have that good alignment. We, of course, want to make sure that that pelvis is relatively quiet as we lie here. So it's comfortably spaced and on the floor here. So we'll just put my other pelvis, lucky lady I am, I have two pelvises, coming here, lying here on the back. That is what's happening in the pelvis right now. And just finding a little bit of stillness. Sometimes again, you need that little wiggle out, see where that best spot for you to lie is. And what we're working on, if you remember, is now bringing the leg towards the body and bringing the leg away from the body or back behind the body. So that first movement that we're going to do is relatively simple. However, I want you to try to keep that pelvis nice and quiet. So we're simply moving that leg bone. Finding ease in the rest of your body. We shouldn't be clenching or holding or bracing anywhere else. And we're going to bring that knee up towards the body. So we're going to bring that knee up and down. And you might be like, wow, this is so simple. I know how to do this. I didn't realize it was my leg bone moving, but that's what's happening. The knee is traveling because this big long bone is allowing us to bring that leg towards the body. And you can decide how close it comes. So if you start feeling a bit of shifting happening through your pelvis, maybe make that movement a bit smaller. So you don't have to come super high. Having those hands placed on the front part of the pelvis might help guide you to know how far that knee comes in. If you start feeling tucking of the pelvis, sometimes that happens where we tuck our tail under. That's not what we're going for here. We want to keep the natural curves of the lumbar spine, that low back, as we lift that leg. Awesome. Let's take it over to the other side. And feel that shifting. Did something shift in your body? Did it have to move? I felt my pelvis shift, so I'm going to readjust, take a moment, make sure I've got equal pressure on both sides of the backs of my pelvis. And I'm not going to try to grip with my toes either, right? The leg that's staying down, that foot that's staying down, we want to keep those toes soft. Again, it's a demonstration that other parts of your body are doing the work instead. So let's see if I could keep it easy and smooth. Awesome. So from here, we've woken up a little bit through the front of the hip into hip flexion, that leg bone coming forward. We're going to now add a little bit of tension or a little bit of resistance. So taking our hand, it can be the same hand as the leg that's coming up, or if you want, it can be the opposite hand. It's whatever you feel best with. I, on the other hand, have kind of short arms. So to have my opposite hand seems kind of weird. So I'm going to keep my same hand. And what I'm going to do is bring that knee back up. But this time I'm going to try to press into the hand. You might start to feel maybe a little bit of a bulge in the lower belly. So just notice what happens. Do you feel a little increased tension on the fronts of the hip? We're starting to target a muscle group that allows this action to occur. And this is a muscle group that is always working, because guess what? If you flip me upright and my head was going up towards the ceiling, I'd be essentially in a sitting position, right? We got hip flexion a lot, particularly in the sitting world that we live in. Okay, let's switch to the other side. So bringing awareness to the muscle that allows that hip to bend. Notice what's happening. Did that pelvis start to move? Any bit of shifting or bracing? And if that's happening, just make the movement smaller. It doesn't have to be huge to engage that muscle group. Beautiful. All right. So guess what? That was just the front. That was only hip flexion. We still have to do extension. And the best way to do that actually is to flip ourselves over onto our tummies. We'll come onto our fronts. And what I suggest is if this is not a good position for you, you can always tuck a pillow under the lower belly to help kind of keep a little bit more curve into the spine. I myself am going to stack my hands one on top of the other and place my forehead down, spreading my shoulder blades apart a little bit. And then I'm just going to wiggle a little bit just to find, again, that place of comfort and ease in this position. And we want to just find an opportunity to just relax into the floor before we ask our bodies to do work. So just soften, relax. And so there's a couple variations here as we lift the leg up. We're going to be pulling that leg down and up a bit. So think about the pelvis. We're going to make sure it's quiet. So I'm slightly going to just see if I can get that leg bone to come slightly out of that joint. If that doesn't make sense to you, don't worry about it. I just simply want to avoid using my low back to lift my leg. So I'm going to contract behind me, my buttocks, and lift my leg up. Now, anytime you get a sensation in that low back, it might mean that you need to lift a little less.
trying to teach our bodies how to properly move. And as you feel maybe a little more smoothness, as you tell your body, no, this is the right way to do it. My back doesn't need to do the lifting. It's my buttocks and my hamstrings, the backs of the thighs, lifting that leg up. Now you may notice that in this exercise, I've kept my leg long, simply because if I bent my knee, that becomes a little bit more challenging because then the weight of the leg is a little bit more. So then here, this is going to be harder to lift up my leg because the leg is stacked and gravity's working against my body. So I invite you just to keep that one leg straight. And if you're feeling like you need a bit more resistance, you definitely can add that knee bend. Really press down through the front of the pelvis, through the pubic bone and the front edges of that pelvis. So if you were to look at your pelvis here, we flipped over to the point that we're lying like so. So the crests, these top crests of the pelvis should be down on the floor. Now go ahead and switch to the other leg if you haven't done so already. Again, acknowledging that we're not working the back, we're actually working the buttock and the buttock cheek, I guess we could call it. So that's your glute muscle on the back of the thigh, as well as and the hamstring. The two work together to lift that leg up into hip extension. Small movement, I know, but very strong movement. Very awakening type movement coming through that back body. So once you've done that, go ahead and lower both legs down. Just shift the legs and hips sort of side to side to release that. Awesome. And then go ahead and come up to a tabletop position. And in this position, if your knees don't love being kneeled on, you can definitely grab a towel or a blanket and set it down so that you have a bit of a cushion. So I'll have a bit of a cushion here. In this hands and knees position, we can definitely do hip flexion and extension. So again, wrists under elbows, elbows under shoulders, knees right underneath those hips, and those leg bones are perpendicular to the floor. From here, we'll allow the leg to slightly lift up, and we'll slowly bring that knee forward into flexion, and then all the way back into extension. Now you can see that I decided to keep my knee bent, but if it feels better for you, you can definitely have that leg straight. Now the only thing is when you come back into flexion, you have to bend that knee to allow the leg to come through. So hip flexion and extension. And we can work on doing the same, or not the same, probably both of the actions at the same time. There is the word same. You can do both. Very strong movement, keeping that pelvis quiet as best we can. Fantastic. Okay, starting to get a little tired, drop that knee down. You can slide those hips from side to side a little bit, and then coming to the other side. So it's really important that you listen to what's going on in your body. If there's anything that's talking to you that's other than your hips, so let's say your back or your shoulders or your wrists, then definitely there's alternatives at play here. You definitely could come down onto those forearms to release those wrists. It does make you maybe a little more claustrophobic because your head's down further, but that will then give you the ability to challenge that hip without worrying about other areas of the body that might not be enjoying it for whatever reason. Good. Now this was a very strong movement coming onto hands and knees simply because the pelvis is no longer being supported by the floor. So that is the progression of challenging those hips into hip flexion and to extension. Now I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about walking, because I know I have earlier in this video. And so I'll just slowly demonstrate here as I cut myself off. You can see as I walk forward,
My back leg is in extension. My front leg is in flexion. So as I walk, I'm constantly doing hip flexion and extension. And this area and movement of the leg bone is so common that we don't even think about it. So these exercises that I just shared with you are going to be really good to connect the body, connect the mind with the movements, and hopefully when you're walking next, you can start thinking about, my hip is flexing, my hip is extending, my hip is flexing, my hip is extending. And of course, don't do that for too long, but definitely make the connection for yourself. Surprise! Guess what? You do hip flexion and extension all the time. And now I've equipped you with some new exercises or potentially some oldies and goodies that you can do to help focus your attention on hip flexion and hip extension. That leg bone sure does that action all the time. And now you have a little bit more of an awareness, maybe a little bit more connection to how that actual leg bone moves in the hip socket. This is Lisa Workman, clinical exercise physiologist, here to share with you real moves for real life, because really, this cannot get more real than the movements that you do with walking every single day. And I am so fortunate and happy that you watched this video because I'm here to support you in your physical activity journey. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.